So we've been at this for over 2 years, which is, I think, again, something we never imagined in the beginning. You know, as we weren't just putting out content, we had become a full-fledged 501c3 nonprofit organization. We are now at the point, though, of recognizing, you know, this was always meant to be a crisis responsive organization.
Can you say, "This is Dr. Amanda Zelechoski"?
Why do we have to?
Just try it.
Oh, I can't.
Deep breath. Okay.
This is Dr. Amanda Zelechoski. Lindsay Malloy. Ah!
Now, wait, say Dr. Lindsay Malloy.
Dr. Lindsay Malloy.
No, come back.
This is Dr. Lindsay Malloy. Welcome to the Parenting Podcast.
One more time.
And then after that, can we have a candy flip?
No.
Please, Mommy.
Okay, ready?
Pandemic Parenting Podcast.
Excellent.
As we head into the final months of the year, we're also heading into what will be the final months of Pandemic Parenting and the Pandemic Parenting Podcast. After more than 2 years of fulfilling our mission to reach parents where they're at with immediately accessible and relevant science-based resources, it's time for us to close this chapter. This was not an easy decision to make, and Lindsay and I are so grateful for the guidance and support from the Pandemic Parenting Board of Directors and our Executive Director, Jennifer Valentine, who helped us make this decision and figure out all the logistics, internally and externally, to close down the organization and communicate with all of you in our community. While we won't be releasing any new content after the end of the calendar year 2022, we will keep our podcast episodes, videos, infographics, and other digital resources freely available on our website, YouTube, and wherever you listen to podcasts for the years to come. And until then, we have a few exciting projects we're still working on rolling out, including Spanish translations of our resources, full-length podcast transcriptions, and digital toolkits for community organizations that package together content around specific topics. We'll continue to share all of this on our website, through email, and social media over the next few months, so you can follow us there for more information. In this short episode, you'll hear Lindsay and I reflect on the journey we've been on together, where you can continue to find pandemic parenting resources, and what's next for us both, personally and professionally. Next month, we'll be back with one final full-length episode of the Pandemic Parenting Podcast, so stay tuned for that.
So when we created Pandemic Parenting, our goal really was to be this crisis responsive, timely organization to provide resources and support, you know, to parents in real time, kind of translate the research in real time for people in ways that were really helpful. So as we've been kind of thinking about our goals and our mission, in many ways, we've accomplished what we set out to do. The pandemic, of course, isn't completely over. It may never be completely over. And recognizing that, I think we've really tried to be thoughtful and reflective about, you know, when it is time for us to kind of wrap up.
Mm-hmm. And I think when you said when we started this organization, I mean, actually, we never really planned to start an organization. At the beginning, it was, let's do a few webinars to get some of the research out there that is relevant to parents. And like a handful of webinars turned into a full-fledged nonprofit organization, which I don't think either of us saw coming. Mm-hmm. And it's been a huge, you know, honor and privilege to be part of it. It became clear, I guess, pretty early on that there would be research coming out, but that there was a lot of research that already existed that was relevant to some of the things that parents were struggling with, like managing sibling conflict at home with everyone stuck at home, making decisions about whether to send kids back to school or not, and what we know about decision fatigue and things like that. So we did eventually share research on the effects of the pandemic. I mean, you really tackled that wholeheartedly in season 2 of the podcast. But initially we were more thinking, okay, what do we know from developmental psychology and from psychological research that could be helpful to parents right now in this moment? And what can we share with them in ways that is accessible, like literally and figuratively? So is devoid of all the jargon and everything and typical scientific articles, and also is done in a format that parents can actually access, like a webinar in the evening that's recorded that they can look at when they want to, or a podcast that they can listen to while they're on the go. So we're just trying to meet parents where they were, you know, in terms of the science and the method of delivering it.
Yeah, in these sort of bite-sized and engaging ways. So Yeah, it started with a few webinars. And then as we got a lot of response, people were joining, they were asking questions, they were giving us topics they wanted us to cover. We started to be contacted by a lot of media also wanting resources, knowing how to kind of talk about these things with parents, again, share resources. So then it became clear that this was going to be much bigger than just a couple webinars. We put together this great team, that helped us really grow it into a full-fledged 501c3 nonprofit organization, which, as you said, is much more than we anticipated in the beginning, but the need was there. And there was this incredible team there to support us in doing that.
Yeah. And so much respect for anyone who works at or runs a nonprofit organization, because, there were certainly a lot of challenges associated with that we would not have been able to foresee necessarily, because that's not what our training is in. I mean, we are able to do science communication, but that doesn't necessarily mean translate into knowing how to run a nonprofit organization. So there was a big learning curve for us. And so yeah, just lots of respect for people who are doing that and or trying to raise funds for their organizations on a regular basis. So how did we get to be here, Amanda?
So what happened was I sent you an email right in the middle of running. Remember when I used to run consistently? That was amazing. Okay. So, right. We both had done these studies, when the pandemic was beginning, you and I each had launched research studies, knew of each other's work, but hadn't really met each other in person, which I think is just such a fun part of our story that we still haven't met in person after 2.5 years of doing this work together. Such a pandemic match made in heaven, right? And so, but had, again, followed each other's work and were familiar with each other. So I knew we were both doing these studies. And toward the end of spring of 2020, I was starting to analyze our data from our study. I think you were doing the same. And I just felt like this is going to take so long to get this information out there. And there are these pieces in these studies and these data that would be so helpful for people, I think, to know if we could do a better job of explaining it to them and getting it in their hands sooner. And so, yeah, I was in the middle of a run, which was the only alone time I was getting during the pandemic, was to pretend like I really liked running and then go do it. And it just sort of came to me like, what if we just did this in a different way? What if we started to translate some of this stuff for parents, like we would be talking to our fellow mom friends or whatever it might be. So I remember shooting you off an email in the exact spot that I still go running sometimes. And every time I pass by that spot, I think about, oh, this is right where I just stopped and was like, I'm just going to send her an email and see if she wants to talk about this. So
yeah, well, when I got the email, I was really excited because we hadn't met before, but I was familiar with your work. We were both recruiting participants online for our various studies on parents and COVID. And we were both pandemic parenting ourselves. And we were kind of talking about that and the challenges with that online. And so, and I kind of thought, oh, great, let's meet in a few weeks about it. And I just sort of thought it would take like all this time. But, you were like, no, we're going to do our first webinar on August 6th. No, I'm just kidding. But it was nice because I think you really pushed it to happen without like the typical ways that we would slow ourselves down or like sabotage ourselves in some ways. It was a really creative idea. We both feel really passionately about science communication, about getting research out there in the world where people can use it, not just on the shelves for other scientists to read. And so we just kind of had a meeting or two and we launched our first webinar, which I thought, we'd do maybe a couple of webinars for the few months of the pandemic, and then that would be it. But it sort of had a life of its own. And just to like make clear that this sort of direct communication with parents is so rare in psychology, unless parents are, their child is having some sort of issue or problem and they go and they seek care or intervention. And then there's like direct communication that way. But not a lot of like direct communication of research and preventative stuff or just information with parents. And so that was like the gap that we were trying to fill during a time of crisis and what we saw as need just in talking to our other friends and colleagues and things.
And I don't think we knew by sort of launching that first webinar just a couple of weeks later how it would be received, because you're right, this doesn't happen very often. So in some ways, this did feel a little outlandish, like, what if we just start putting the research out there, but, and just see what happens. And, we had hundreds of people show up to that first webinar. And I think that was a good indicator to us, like, oh, there is a need here. And people really want community. They want a place they can ask questions in real time. They want to know that they're going to get credible information, that's scientifically grounded information, clinical best practices, all those kinds of things. So I think that really told us, like, okay, maybe we're onto something here, and this can fill a need for right now. And the other piece is that, in the beginning, there was some coverage by the Washington Post within our first week of launching. And that, I think, made a huge difference, which again taught us, as we started to get a lot of media inquiries after that, like, wow, people are craving this information, and journalists are seeing that too, and want to try to get information into the hands of parents. So that was sort of the beginning. Yeah, we did the first few webinars, and then we recognized, we didn't ever wanted this to be just about our research or our expertise or experiences. And so, but we have the privilege of being connected to these big networks, right? Professionally, with researchers and clinicians and scholars. And so we started to pull in our friends, and have them come on and talk about their areas of expertise relevant to the topics that parents were telling us they wanted us to give information about. So we did webinars for about the first 6 months or so. Those were usually live, and then we'd post the recordings. And then our team really challenged us to think about, maybe this isn't sustainable, in part because of our schedules and both of our full-time jobs and the challenges that pose to really do things in live ways, to have the production process that comes along with doing things live. What if we shifted to podcasts? Because parents aren't always able to join, of course, at the times we were doing the webinars. So talk a little bit about that, like when we shifted to podcasts.
When the pandemic first hit, I joked, like, I think on Twitter, saying, oh, everyone's going to start a podcast now, aren't they? Like, every academic's going to start a podcast during the pandemic. And then we started a podcast. So, but yeah, I think that was it allowed us some more flexibility in terms of scheduling and, doing all the things behind the scenes we had to do to make that happen, but also allowed more flexibility for parents to listen when they wanted to not have to be watching it on a computer, or, they could actually just listen and have it on the go. And so I think that helped in terms of accessibility in kind of all senses of the word. And throughout the pandemic, different topics became relevant, right? Like, we eventually had an episode on vaccine anxiety. Well, that wasn't happening in the beginning because parents, there were no vaccines for kids. But, once that became reality, then we did episodes on that. So we were constantly like looking at what was happening, hearing from others, and evolving our topics and our ideas around that. We really wanted the information to be freely available, like scientifically grounded, good, credible information from experts in their various fields, and free. So you didn't have to shell out the big bucks for this stuff. So yeah.
Free and like time sensitive. Part of what we recognized was parents, just like we, throughout many of those stages, didn't have time to read the experts we were bringing on, amazing books or, articles they published, those kinds of things. We just were trying to move so quickly. And I know you and I and our team were trying to stay out in front of what are the issues coming up? What are people worried about? And so, it wasn't just making it free, but also accessible. Like, how can we have these quick bite-sized, frequently asked questions, video clips? How do we have segments of the podcast that somebody can jump right to if they have a particular question? Yeah. And also knowing that the wait lists of mental health professionals were just so ridiculous at various stages of the pandemic too, that even if a parent wanted to access more in-depth mental health resources for their child or their family, they weren't able to in many geographic regions or contexts. So I think those were all some of the original goals that we just kept evolving how we were trying to meet those goals, right? Always with that eye toward translating the science, meeting parents where they are, and staying out in front of, some of the questions and concerns that were continuing to come up.
Right. So now what happens?
Yeah. So we've been at this for over 2 years, which is, I think, again, something we never imagined in the beginning. As we weren't just putting out content, we had become a full-fledged 501c3 nonprofit organization, because that allowed us to reach more people, provide more resources, partner with other organizations, be able to access grants, that were responsive to various COVID needs, mental health needs, those kinds of things. So we became a full-fledged nonprofit organization, which really just sort of expanded what we could do and how many families and parents we could reach. We are now at the point, though, of recognizing, this was always meant to be a crisis responsive organization, not go on forever. Our hope was to meet a need while the need was there in real time, but also to recognize, when it's time to move on to other things. So we've created, hundreds of resources, video clips, episodes, infographics.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's just so many things. I get overwhelmed in a great way when I sit back and think about all of the content we've been able to produce for people, again, always keeping it free, publicly available and accessible. And those resources will live on. But as an organization, we've been doing some important soul searching with our team, with our board to recognize, when is it time, to wrap up the organizational side of things. I think this is going to totally date us, but I wanted to be like Seinfeld and know when it was time to also kind of go out on a positive note while things are still, helpful and available to people, but not keep our proverbial doors open forever.
Right. And I think the whole time you and I have been really clear about what our areas of expertise are and what they're not. And so there are certainly aspects of our research that concern parenting, but we are not like parenting expert. We have the connections, we bring on people, we talk to them, we share lots of the developmental and clinical psychology research that's relevant. But once we started brainstorming, like about thinking about a new name for our organization and everything, we realized we were kind of potentially stepping out of our comfort zone of what we felt comfortable talking about, which is more like coping with these negative experiences, dealing with crisis trauma that might have been happening during the pandemic. And so that was another reason to make way for some other like parenting experts and really, have kept our focus on this issue of pandemic parenting. Those resources that Amanda mentioned, they're all still available. They will remain accessible.
Yeah. And that was part of our goal, is a lot of the content we were creating and conversations we were having, of course, go far beyond the pandemic, right? Parents are always going to have questions about their kids' anxiety or having conversations about difficult things with their children or parents' mental health, their teens' mental health, like so many of these topics. Yeah, there were parts of it that were related to the pandemic, but much of it was just questions we have about, parenting when our kids are dealing with really difficult things or we're dealing with difficult things. So I think knowing that was our goal was to create resources that could live on far beyond the organization. But I think your point about us staying in our lane is an important one, like that it goes to the authenticity of the work that you and I do, the integrity we have around our research and what our limits are to our expertise, and just sort of recognizing where it makes sense to, bring in our voices or the voices of many of our colleagues and other experts, and where it makes sense to step aside and say, okay, we did a good thing for a while. We hope that we were able to help a lot of people. We hope these resources continue to help people when they're Googling things in the middle of the night. But there are also, it's also time for us to be able to focus back on some of our other work in the other roles that we play in our lives. Right.
And I think, there tends to be such a like, oh, if an organization is closing its doors, then there's something bad about that, as in, it's some sort of failure. And I think we sort of struggled with that a little bit when we talked about shutting it down, but it's like, well, no, we had these goals. They were relatively short-term objectives. We met them. We were this organization in response to this specific event or, series of events. And we put a lot of content out there that, like we said, will live on, but we accomplished those goals. And there's no need to kind of keep pushing and keep, talking about pandemic parenting until, the next pandemic, which hopefully
don't even put that in the universe.
I know.
Right. Exactly.
Goodness.
Yeah, I think one of our last goals that we're working on before we, do wrap up as an organization is really outreach and getting these resources into more vulnerable communities. We're also working on translating a number of the resources into Spanish, which is exciting and something we've been wanting to do since the beginning. So So really having this eye toward, what are the last few things we want to be sure we do before we move on to other projects. We're meeting those goals, and our team is working really hard to make sure that happens before we close our doors as an organization, which again, will put out more resources that can live on beyond pandemic parenting.
And so what's next for you then? What are you going to do with all of your extra time?
Yeah, it is. It's amazing to sort of think about, right. This has taken up a lot of time. Obviously, you and I both have full-time jobs. We're parenting young kids in various very busy stages of their lives. And so this is both exciting and freeing to know that, okay, we did what we set out to do, and now we get to shift our focus, which I think is actually pretty common. People may not realize, but for people in our roles and in academic contexts, people who do research, like there is an ebb and flow to these projects for us that you don't set out doing research studies or intervention projects or outreach projects, expecting them to go on forever. So I think for us, this is exciting. This is the way our roles typically work, where you do something for a few years, you accomplish the goals, hopefully you set out to do, and then you're ready to think forward always about the next project. And so for me, my role at my university is to build several graduate programs to really meet the mental health training needs in our region, try to put a dent in a bit of the shortage we find in Northwest Indiana, the greater Chicago area, which is where I am at my university, which is Purdue University Northwest. We're building some graduate programs for clinical psychology. And part of my role there is also to expand our clinical services for the community, to build a psychological assessment clinic, to build research opportunities for students to be involved with that have really direct applied implications for our region, which is so needed. So it's so exciting. Like what we've learned, I guess I can say for me in doing this pandemic parenting work, is to throw out a lot of the rules. Like we have learned to be so creative, which has been, quite frankly, our team pushing us out of our typical academic comfort zones. When I just sort of think about our team, our digital content creator, Victoria, our producer, of all things digital editing, Carmen, and, our social media team, Miranda and Lydia, our executive director, Jen, like all of these folks, Paula, helping us create these amazing email newsletters. They have forced us out of our comfort zones. They remind us when we're totally nerding out and need to rein it in, but have taught us to translate science in ways that are so much more engaging and accessible for people. And I don't think I can ever go back to, in some ways, who I was as a teacher or as a scholar, maybe before all this. So there's just a lot of things I take away into my next projects that I'm so excited about. What about for you?
Yeah, no, I definitely learned a lot from them. A lot. I am going to write a tell-all book, I think, about pandemic parenting.
Can't wait.
Tell-all. It's going to be like In Touch Weekly. But no, I am working on a book, but an academic book, focused on my research areas. So that's exciting.
Nice.
Can't really share too much about that just yet, but really
Stay
excited
tuned,
about that.
right?
Yeah. Maybe I'll do a podcast. No, it's, but yeah, that's the big thing. And, continuing to teach and do research and all those things, never forgetting like a lot of the lessons that we learned about presentation and about what you can do if you have the right team, what you can accomplish. And so just thinking about sharing research findings in the future with the legal practitioners, for example, and how that might look different down the road now that, I've worked with such fantastic people who know so much about so many things that I don't know about, and that can, if you have the right team assembled, that you can really break new ground. And so that has been really exciting, good part of it.
Yeah, I think that like one of our goals in the beginning too, which we didn't talk much about, was to actually encourage a lot of our colleagues to take some of these risks as well, to get information out there into, communities and populations that can really use it. And so as we have learned different ways to do that, our hope is to also, just encourage a lot of our colleagues, like, try something new, talk about your research maybe in a different way, present it to an audience you wouldn't normally, and bring in people to help you do that in more interesting and effective ways than often we are taught or conditioned to think is the right way to do it.
Right. It doesn't need to take 7 to 10 years to get that information out there. And with the pandemic, we didn't have 7 to 10 years, and we
Yeah.
did see things change, right? Like there were some shifts. I remember research on COVID was made freely available, open access. And it's like, so that can be done. A lot of the typical boundaries and like red tape was, brought down with this. And I think there's ways that we can make things more accessible. And, we've only touched on a few. And I think hopefully in the future we'll continue those and even more.
I think one of my favorite parts of doing this work the last couple of years has just been the sense of community. So when I sort of think about our listeners and folks who have been following pandemic parenting from the very beginning, like I do get sad, like I will miss you and I will miss this community, and just thinking about the ways we've been able to sort of gather together, whether that was live when you all tuned into webinars, whether that was comments you've sent us, after listening to a podcast episode, which we've so appreciated, knowing like, okay, this is still reaching people. They still want more. They're still asking questions. And so I guess I'm curious for you, like, for this pandemic parenting community we've been so privileged to walk with the last few years, like what do you hope they continue to think about or remember as they're not hearing from us so often anymore?
Well, I think remembering that the resources are always there and available. And I feel like for me, there are some that are going to become more relevant over time. Like now that my kids are getting a bit older, like, oh, there's the episodes on activities or on sibling conflict or whatever, like they'll become more relevant in different ways. And so I think just remembering that those free resources are out there and available. But yeah, I'm going to miss that connection as well. And hopefully we'll find other ways of filling it. I mean, certainly while I've been away on sabbatical, I've missed our relationship, like our friendship, and like being able to do this work with you, just with the time difference made things so difficult to connect regularly. And I think that our pandemic parenting relationship like helped us through so much of those early days of the pandemic. So that we've got to figure out a different way to, to maintain that. Like maybe I'll just become patient zero for the next pandemic. So I just missed Amanda.
Oh, I know.
So sorry about this COVID-22, everyone.
Well, maybe that should be one of our goals. Like maybe we need to report back when we actually finally meet in person, what that'll look like. We're going to have that like slow motion run in the airport toward each other or whatever, or at our conference or whatever that'll look like. But yeah, I am definitely going to miss just all of it, right? Like this regular connection. I do think you and this team were one of my biggest coping strategies, throughout the pandemic, just being able to do this work and know that we're helping others. And by doing that, we were helping ourselves in lots of ways too, which is, why so many of us went into psychology, to learn about these things and master skills that allow us to help others cope as well. I think I want people to remember too, like, I continued to be humbled and surprised with many of the conversations. Like, we'd bring in some of these amazing experts and they would just share this incredible knowledge. But a theme that I would often get back in feedback was just people really liked to know that they weren't alone. So it wasn't even always what information we or other experts were sharing or teaching. It was just that sense of community. And I think you and I needed to know that, right? Like so many of these conversations were so validating for us too, as parents in the midst of this, like, okay, others are feeling incredible grief right now. Others are feeling a lot of that mom guilt that, we spent some time talking about and unpacking. So just the sense of support and community can look different in different contexts. So I think that's a big lesson that I hope our listeners take away too, that there are so many places to find community if you're open to it. And, this will always be here for you. Like you said, these resources as a community to remind you that you're not alone. And we all struggle with these things in different ways. It looks different for each of us, but nobody has it figured out. So where will these resources live on? We should probably talk a little bit about that. We, are committed to keeping the website pandemic-parent.org up and running, keeping those resources there. And on the YouTube playlist, you can always find things there. So everything for the foreseeable future, as long as we can maintain it, will remain online where it is now, including our website. Lindsay and I are both pretty active on social media. So as we continue to find resources, I'm sure we'll both continue to tweet them or share them in various contexts. We're fans of lots of other amazing content creators around all things parenting and psychological science related to parenting. So we regularly post things from our friends and colleagues, newsletters, research organizations. So you can continue to find us amplifying others who we think are doing really great work. The Roadmap to Resilience stuff will continue to live on as well, which is an audio series and some additional resources like infographics and, video clips focused on kids who are experiencing stress and trauma. So you can find those episodes there, which are geared toward lots of different professionals and caregivers in different spaces like legal audiences, policymakers, just community members, and so on. For me, as we just sort of wrap up, I just really want to thank everybody who's been on this journey with us. Thank everybody who has supported us in any way, whether that's donating. You really did help us keep the lights on and take good care of our team. So I want to thank everybody who donated, who supported, who has sent us notes and feedback and given us ideas for what to talk about, recommended experts for us to talk to, and most especially our team, who has just been incredible this entire journey. Yeah. And I want to thank you for taking that email and that phone call and not telling me to keep running and talk to somebody else about this.
I should have been suspicious right then. Like, she's running? Oh, I don't know. I don't know weird. If I should.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, thank you for involving me. It's been great.
It has been. Until we meet for the first time. All right, everybody, take good care and please continue to give yourselves some grace. Yeah, thank you again.
As an organization, Pandemic Parenting will be closing our virtual doors at the end of 2022. However, we've got one last full-length episode of the podcast coming your way next month. And as a reminder, all the resources on our websites, www.pandemic-parent.org and www.roadmaptoresilience.org, all of the resources on YouTube and all of the resources on our podcast feeds will continue to be available for the years to come. Thank you for joining us in this season of Pandemic Parenting.